Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Crossroads of Religion and Politics lecture by Tony P. Hall. My name is Jenny Wiley-Legath, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion. And on behalf of the Center and the Woodrow Wilson School, with whom we co-sponsor this popular lecture series, which we've been putting on for close to a decade now, we'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon for our event. Our next Crossroads lecture will be 1 week from tomorrow in this room at this time, where we'll hear from Professor Jok Madut Jok of Loyola Marymount University on Sudan and the Fallacy of Nationhood, How Political Islam Threatens National Unity. I urge you to pick up a flyer listing the events that the Center for the Study of Religion, since I did the introduction today, I get to pitch our events, is hosting this spring. There are flyers by each of the door. Our next CSR event will be this coming Monday, February 16th at 4:30 p.m. in Lewis Library 120, at which Sarah Jones Nelson, director of the Princeton Project on Fragility, Sarah, are you here? She's around here somewhere, will be speaking on the fragility of truth and other inescapable facts. I guarantee you won't want to miss this. So introducing our esteemed speaker today is our own David W. Miller, director of the Princeton Faith and Work Initiative. David brought his initiative to our center this year after spending the past 5 years at Yale, where he helped found and direct the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. David brings a bilingual perspective to his work because before getting his MDiv and PhD in social ethics from Princeton Seminary, he spent 16 years in senior positions in the world of business and international finance. So you can ask him all questions from all different sides. So to introduce our speaker, please join me in welcoming David Miller.
She's good.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny, for the kind words. I thought for a minute you were going to have me give a talk, and that's not a good idea. Well, I feel a little bit like I'm between dinner courses. We've had the appetizer, and now I'm the palate cleanser to set up the main course. So I'll be brief. It's a pleasure to introduce my friend, Ambassador Hall. Some of you may know he's the former U ambassador to Rome, an extraordinary person, an extraordinary civil servant. If there's one word to summarize your life, it's probably service. Some 24 years as a congressman from the fine state of Ohio, graduate of Denison. He is the longest-serving congressman, I believe, ever in the history of Ohio. And in these days, we can also say with glee that you succeeded doing that without corruption, without allegations, and leave quite a legacy of inspiration to many people. There's not many folks who have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize once, let alone twice. Tony, Ambassador Hall, has been nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. Really an extraordinary accomplishment. He has led and been involved in or give guidance to just about every congressional committee having to do with poverty, hunger, and increasingly in his life he's been interested in the question of faith, the intersection of faith and politics, faith and questions of hunger, faith and questions of poverty. He will talk about all those largely through telling stories, experiences that he has lived and observed as he's traveled around the world. And before I turn over the floor to Tony, I have to say one thing. I always ask a speaker, if I'm privileged to introduce them, tell me one thing about you that's not on your resume, that's not on your official bio, that gives us a little window into who you are. Well, Tony is a former All-American small college football player, for those of you who are curious what that item might be. Yes. And he actually had dreams of playing in the pros. You were running back, if I recall, until, as he put it, quote unquote, he got squashed by bigger people. We're glad that you didn't play pro football. We're glad that you went right into public service. And in many ways, Ambassador Hall is one of Princeton's own in the sense of our informal motto of in the nation's service and in service of the nation that indeed epitomizes the life of Tony Hall. Let's give him a warm welcome. Tony? By the way, one last comment. We will afterwards, after his prepared comments, take questions, so please think ahead, and we'll have a good conversation after we get going, which is, I think, how you like to do it.
I do. Well, thank you, Dr. Miller, and for that lovely introduction. It's certainly better than an introduction I had one time when I went back to my hometown of Dayton, Ohio, and I would go back and report to them, my week in Washington and what was happening, and a friend of mine was getting ready to introduce me, and there was about as many people that are in this room, and he got so excited, he said, "And now for the latest dope from Capitol Hill." Well, I am excited to be here with you, and it is a great honor, and I've had a interesting career. I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years. I was in the country of Thailand, and I came back. I got involved in business. I was in real estate for a number of years, and then I ran for the state legislature. I was in the state legislature for 10 years, and then ran for the Congress, served almost 24 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. I represented Dayton, Ohio, and the surrounding suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, and then was appointed by President Bush to be an ambassador for about 3.5 years in Rome to the U.S. Food and Agriculture Organizations, and it's been a great life for me, and it's been wonderful for my family, and I'm one that really pushes being a public servant. Martin Luther had an interesting saying several hundred years ago. He said, we need to send our good people into the church. He said we need to send our best into politics. I believe that. I really do. I have to be careful of the time today. I have so many things I want to say, and I hardly know where to start. I remember actually as a politician saying that, and a little 8-year-old in the front row said, "Well, why don't you start somewhere near the end?" So I hope today, instead of being long-winded, I hope I can kind of leave you maybe with a couple things. Well, one thing. And one of the things that really comes from the book that I wrote a book called Changing the Face of Hunger. And I probably should have had that book entitled Do the Thing That's in Front of You, because it's the thing that I learned from Mother Teresa many years ago. I had the pleasure to serve and to work with Mother Teresa on a number of occasions. Met her many times. One time I was in Calcutta. I think it was my first trip with her. And she was taking me around to, the sights in the city. And if any of you have ever been to Calcutta, you know that back in the late 70s and 80s, even today, at nighttime you can't even walk down the street without, walking over people. People sleeping in the street, just masses and masses of humanity, of people that are poor. And it was so staggering to me. It was kind of early in my career as a congressman. It was so staggering to me. I said to her, I spoke too loud. I said, how can you possibly make a difference? Look at this poverty here. It's unbelievable. Where do you start? Forgetting Dayton, Ohio, or Washington, D.C., or Boise, Idaho. We're in a place that has so much poverty. Where does one start? And Mother Teresa said, well, she didn't say anything, actually. She went and she picked this person that was lying in front of her, in front of us, and got some people to help her, and he was sick, and you could tell that he was not in good shape, and she got some people to take him back to her hospice, and she began to clean him off and wash him and take good care of him, love him. Mother Teresa she touched everybody. She would rub you and touch you and hug you and kiss you. She was just incredible in that way. And she said to me later, do the thing that's in front of you. We can't all come to Calcutta. And just do the thing that's in front of you. Why? Well, I'll tell you, you look at the world today. The world, I don't have to explain to you about the financial situation. But as many of you know, 25,000 people will die today in the world. They'll die of hunger, and they'll die of hunger-related diseases. And 25,000 died yesterday, and 25,000 will die tomorrow. Half the world lives on less than $2 a day. There's well over 1 billion people that live on $1 a day. Senior citizens are living on a can of tomato soup, and they're stretching it 2 and 3 and 4 days. I met a couple from Appalachia near my district in Ohio who had been living on a can of tomato soup for a week, thinning it out, stretching it. Because by the time they got around to, paying their prescription bills, because they lived just on Social Security, they weren't making it. There's 37 million people in this country today that are hungry. Now, it's not the kind of starving that you'll see in Darfur. It's not the kind of starving you'll see in North Korea or elsewhere in the 30 most difficult nations of the world. But it's the kind of hunger where 2 and 3 days out of every month, people will go to bed hungry. And they'll go to bed without food. And normally, it's the mother that sacrifices. And what happens is that after they get done paying their rent and maybe a daycare center bill or transportation, their utility bill, they run out of money. And you'll see at the end of the month, various food banks and soup kitchens all over the country, that it's staggering how many people actually go in for help. And it's on the increase. It's on the increase, of course, because of the financial situation. There are some places I've seen in this world, especially in Africa, where at least 10% of the population are orphans because of HIV/AIDS, because of their parents dying. It doesn't seem possible that the world is like this, but it is. It's pretty much like what Charles Dickens said in 1859. He said in his book, The Tale of Two Cities. He said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. And sadly, it is the tale of two worlds that we live in today. One that's pretty rich, one that's very poor. And today, in dozens of poor countries all over the world, little boys and girls and mothers and older people, they live in poverty, disease, hunger, unclean water, hopelessness, and despair are their daily companions. And we in America, we're fond of saying, this hasn't been a good day, or I've had a bad day. But when we think of it, that even on our worst day, when we are blessed with more food, more shelter, more clothes, more security, more health care, and more than our brothers and sisters are on their very, very best day. When I talk about these people that I have seen in the world, people ask, well, how do they survive? Well, a lot of them don't. A lot of them don't. I believe that God wants me to be involved with these people. I think he wants us all to be involved. There's over 2,500 verses in the scriptures that deal with the issue of poverty, of sickness, of orphans, of widows, of the hungry, of people that live in prisons, of the alien. It's over 25. It's the second most talked about theme in the scriptures. There's so many verses you probably can't pick up a page without reading about it. Two of my favorite are in Psalms, where I believe one of them is in 16, the other one is in 19 of, I'm sorry, not Psalms, Proverbs, where God says that if you, and I'm paraphrasing now, if you are good to the poor, you honor me. Then he says it, a very similar thing in 19. He says, if you are gracious to the poor, you lend to me. And God doesn't say that many places in the scripture, that if you are good to the poor, you lend to me, you honor me. I'm kind of excited about those verses. And of course, you know Matthew 25. I mean, it seems like everybody quotes Matthew 25, where Jesus is talking about the least of these and the people on the right and the people on the left. And he says, I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Because they were asking, when did we see you? When you were poor, when you were sick, when you were hungry, when you were in prison. And so Jesus responds, he says, the fact is that because you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And in this passage, I would emphasize one. Just take care of that one person. It's kind of strange to me that I'm sitting here talking about the poor. I've never really been poor except the time that I was in the Peace Corps. And I came from a fairly affluent family. And there was poverty pretty close to me because I live very close to Appalachia. As David said, I think probably when I was growing up in high school, and even college, I probably was just thinking about playing a good game of football and getting through school and having a good time. But then I went to the Peace Corps and I took my showers out of a bucket and I slept under a mosquito net for 2 years, and it changed me. And I came back a different person, and I knew that at that time that I felt that I needed to do something where I could serve, because that's what made me feel right. I ran for the state legislature. I was there for 10 years, and then I was in the Congress for 24 years. But when I first went to Congress, I went on a search for God. I didn't know him, but I was tired of my life. I mean, not tired from the standpoint of wanting to end it. I was tired from the standpoint, I was tired of my ambition, and I was tired of my selfishness, and I was tired of my success. Because, after a while, it gets old. And I was beginning to think I was being cheated in life. And so I went on this search, and I found God, and I won't go into it. It's a long story, but a funny thing happened to me, though. I went back to my district again, and another friend introduced me to a predominantly Christian audience. He said, now it's my pleasure to introduce Tony Hall. He's a U.S. congressman and a Christian. And people started to laugh and giggle. And an older man down front, he took it very seriously, and he said, he was squirming in his seat, finally looked up and yelled up. He said, make up your mind, buddy, you can't be both. Then it was during that time that I became chairman of the subcommittee on international hunger. And in 1984, there was this great famine and drought in Ethiopia, and I felt it incumbent upon me that I should go see it. I couldn't understand. I had never seen or heard of 7,000 people dying every day in a country. How can this be? This sounds impossible. I must go see it because, this is something the United States needs to be involved with. And so I went to Ethiopia in 1984, and it changed me. I spent about 3 or 4 days there. I went up again with, actually it was with World Vision and Mother Teresa's group, the Sisters of Charity. We went up to a clinic about 2 hours above Addis Ababa by light plane. And when I went into this small clinic, I noticed that there were thousands of people outside, and they looked terrible. As soon as I walked into the clinic, I had barbed wire around it. It was a very small clinic. The doctor there said, "Look, come with me outside. I want to show you something." So I went with him outside, and there were 3,000 people out there, many of which were children, and they were dying. And they had been walking for in some cases, over 100 miles. And they had sold everything to get here, and they didn't have water, they didn't have food. They heard there was going to be blankets and medicines and lots of stuff, but we didn't have much. And the doctor said, "I can only pick 5 of these children." And everybody, they thought I was a doctor, walking through the crowd, and I saw so many children die. I saw 25 children die in about a minute. And we had the doctor took those 5 in, and that's all we could take care of. That was the first day. I talk about that in the book that I wrote called Changing the Face of Hunger, and I went up. From there, I left and went up on a plateau because I had heard a bunch of people were moving across the country, and they had heard that there was going to be, the Red Cross was going to be up there. They were going to have blankets and water and food. Nobody was there. 50,000 people just came, stopped, laid down, died, and moaned. As I walked through them, I'll never get over that, seeing these children just drop off of their mother, just fall over dead. Never seen anything like that. I never lost that. I mean, I was stunned. And I came home again, a different person, and I thought, we do a lot of things in Congress that really don't amount to much. Spend a lot of time, we waste a lot of time, we debate a lot of things that don't need to be debated, and we debate them over and over and over again. I was going to spend my time doing this, working on issues that are important to me, working on issues that I cared about. And so I began to legislate, and we passed lots of laws, and my committee became very well known. We were called by the New York Times the conscience of the Congress. We were very bipartisan the way we approached it. I began to travel a lot, and I think I've been to well over 125 nations. The problem is, as I began to travel, the people in Dayton, Ohio, my home district, they're beginning to say, Tony, we appreciate your work in Ethiopia or wherever you're going, but, you need to take care of the people in your own district. You need to worry about the people on 3rd Street. And there was a perception that I cared more about international hunger than I cared about them, and it wasn't true. But in politics, perception is about 85%. And people have a perception of it. You better darn well change it, or you're not going to be elected again. And a friend of mine, before I went over to Ethiopia, said to me, "Don't you think he had been working with me. It was a guy that came in and spent a lot of time with me answering questions. We prayed a lot. After about a year, he said, "Don't you think it's time you start bringing God into your workplace?" I said, I believe you're right, but how do I do that in a public arena? Because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to wear God on my lapel here. I don't want to shove religion down people's throats. How do I do that? Well, as I began to read the scriptures, I told you that there's 2,500 verses that deal with the issue. As I went to Ethiopia, it became very clear to me that this was a way that maybe I could give a sermon without speaking, and by working on poverty and hunger, and I could bring this issue into Congress but not worry about being a hypocrite because I didn't have to talk about religion. And if people wanted to know why I did it, they would ask me. Problem is, what do we do about my constituents? Now the perception is that I'm traveling around the world and I'm not worrying about them. Matter of fact, some letters began to come in and said, "Who needs you?" We don't need you. You go and live in Africa. So I thought, oh, brother, I got a problem. Right? This is what I love to do. I got my staff together. We've got to bring this issue back home. I've got to convince my constituency that this is, in fact, an issue that they need to be concerned about. And so as we began to look at the world and as we began to see what was needed in my own district, we began to bring the issue back home and began to get my people involved in it. And the first thing we did, I borrowed something from World Vision. World Vision does these 40-hour fast. And I gathered a bunch of people in Ohio, and there was 4,000 people. We fasted for 40 hours, and it was over a weekend from like Friday night till noon on Sunday. And for every hour that people would fast, they would go out and get contributions, commitments from their friends, from their family, from students, whatever. And we raised about $300,000 over a weekend. The important thing is that 4,000 people fasted, 4,000 people got educated real quick because we had speakers come in and we had ambassadors come in from very poor nations to explain what was happening. Half the money stayed in Dayton, Ohio, went to 66 food banks that I have there. The other half went overseas. If you wanted to go to the Jewish Relief Group, that's where we'd send your money. If you wanted to go to the Catholics, it went to CRS. If you wanted to go to Save the Children or Oxfam, wherever, we'd send it in your name. The important thing is it began to build my constituency. And then we started a senior citizen feeding program where food was donated, but we always had a big donor always had a tremendous amount of meat in my area. And we would feed senior citizens on cold winter weekends. And this program went for 15, almost 18 years. And then we did a gleaning program, where you go out and you glean the crops that people don't want. And gleaning, people say, "Where did you get this idea? This is brilliance." They thought I thought it up. Well, it's scriptural. I mean, actually, if you read the book of Ruth, and even today, even in Israel today, that you are to allow the corners of the field to be unharvested so that the poor and the hungry can come in and pick what they want. So I approached some farmers in my area and I said, if you don't want this food, please, we can come at harvest time and pick it. And we had corn, we had a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit farms. And he said, well, actually, you came at a good time. He says, see this whole field? I got 5 acres at least of corn here, and I'm going to either plow it under or I'm going to let the crows eat it. I said, well, why would you do that? And he said, because this corn, for some reason, this was a bad year. There's 2 or 3 kernels missing, and Americans won't buy this imperfect corn. But it's actually very good corn. He said, I have to plow it under. So I said, no, we'll take it. And so we got hundreds and hundreds of people, that go out in the field and at harvest time. So we'd get calls, the strawberries are coming up, corn is coming, melons, whatever. And it was fun to be in the fields with people, to have a lot of fun with them. And this was all volunteer. There was no government monies. It was all private. And then we started a pickup of food. We had this guy in my district that had a very large laundry business, and he had 20 major trucks, and he would deliver and pick up sheets and towels and linens from hotels and restaurants and country clubs and military bases. And he said, look, Tony, because I'm getting calls now. Restaurants are starting to get embarrassed. Grocery stores are throwing their food out. And, what are we going to do with this food? I mean, this is a waste. We waste 110 million tons of food every year in this country. 110 million tons goes to waste. So we picked it up. And this laundryman, with his 20 trucks, he said, just tell these people to freeze their food and we'll come by and pick it up, and then we'll take it to a central warehouse, and then the word would go out. Today we have stroganoff, strawberries, whatever. So the 66 food banks, they would come down and pick it up. The important thing is not so much the programs, although they were good programs. It's that the constituency was beginning to be built and reinforced and educated. And before I started this, I would do surveys in my district, and I'd say, I want you to rank these issues. You've seen these as voters. Your congressman or senator sent out a survey. So rank these issues: deficit, budget, war, whatever, environment. And prior to doing this work, in my district, hunger and development assistance and poverty ranked last out of maybe 15 to 20 issues. These issues were last. When I got done with my service there, I asked him to do another survey. Let's find out how people are thinking. Poverty and hunger ranked 2 and 3. You can change people's minds. You can educate them. An elected official must bring people along. It's his or her job to educate. It's not his job to point in the air and say, which way is the wind blowing here? It's your job to educate, to push, to recommend. So things were going well, and we had all these programs, and now I could go, still travel the world and travel the United States, and I didn't get any trouble from my constituents now because they believed in this. They were educated in this. We had thousands that were involved with this now, and it was exciting. And then I had become, a couple years before that, the chairman of the overall committee of this. It's called the Select Committee on Hunger. And another thing happened that really was very difficult, and it was a difficult time for me. It was in 1993, and it was a time of very high deficits, like today, even worse. And Congress was not living within their means. We were spending money like drunken soldiers, and we needed to get a handle on things. And as you can imagine, the poor, they don't have a lot of advocates on Capitol Hill. They don't have lobbyists on Capitol Hill to speak of. The lobbyists are the ones that are walking around in the suits and looking good, and they're talking about the taxes of people and, the various things that they can do to represent their country or their businesses, but they're not talking about the poor. Well, you can imagine what happened. The Congress, the Democrats, and I'm a Democrat, they decided to eliminate some committees, and they started with my committee, Select Committee on Hunger. Now, here was the smallest committee in the Congress, the most bipartisan committee in the Congress. We were called the conscience of the Congress. Almost all the laws today that are still working came out of this committee. So it's a good committee. The only committee in the Congress that dealt with this issue. Congress wants to eliminate it. What do? I am mad. I mean, I am really mad. As a matter of fact, I'm so mad that I want to quit Congress. I went back home. I talked to my wife, and I said, Jan, I don't know. I'll tell you, this place, Capitol, I said, they don't have a conscience about these issues. These are issues that I care about. What am I going to do here? I'm thinking about quitting. And she said to me, did you ever think about going on a fast? And it's not that I thought she was crazy, but what do you mean? And so we went and read Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58 is a great chapter on fasting. If you've never read it, get a chance, read it. It's what God considers how he would like people to conduct themselves. So I said, Jan, if I go on a fast, the Congress is never going to understand this. The press is never going to understand this. They'll murder me. I mean, I'll look strange. So we talked about it, and then I went and talked to a few friends, and they said go for it. So my staff was very much against it. So, Tony, your people will never understand this. The press will never understand this. They'll kill you. So I went in front of the Capitol. There must have been 200 microphones there. I said, I'm going on a fast today. I'm not going to eat for a long time. I'm not going to eat anything. I'm just going to drink water. And I'm going to stop when something good happens, when this Congress gets a conscience about these issues. Well, this hit pretty big, and it hit very big in the country. And I thought, well, I might as well go back to Dayton and face the music, because they're going to crucify me. They'll never understand this. So I went back, and this Catholic high school, a very large Catholic high school, I happened to speak to them that day. It had been set up for a long time, and I told them what I was doing and that this was the start of it. And they got so excited, they all decided to fast with me. Mothers, fathers, students, teachers. And they took 3 days. And now the networks are starting to follow me around, and now it really caught on in a very good way. The press began to write about it in a very wonderful way, both on the left and the right. We had 200 universities involved. Now, not everybody in the university. There'd be maybe 100 would take a couple hours or a day. We had 10,000 high schools that fasted with us. The press is writing great stuff, and I'm not eating. And so this went on. I did this for 22 days. I didn't eat. And, of course, I'm losing weight, and the press is getting more and more interested in this. And a lot of good things happened. Amazing things happened. And I won't go into all of them, but the one thing that got me to stop my fast is the World Bank, which, as you know, is the largest development bank in the world. They called me and they said, we're moved by your fast. We've been reading about it, and we want to do a world conference on it. We're going to base it around your fast. Come and make a speech. We're going to invite some world leaders. Secretary General of the UN came, and Jimmy Carter, and a bunch of heads of state. And I gave a speech, and they gave me $100 million after that speech. One fast. All I did was stop eating. And God really did the rest. It was so powerful. I can't believe it. And, my colleagues at first, when I first started this, they didn't want anything to do with me, because they were nervous about me, and because they didn't know how the press was going to report this. It was over Easter, so they all went back home. Then they began to read about it, and when they came back, I was everybody's best friend because it was popular now. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that I feel that sometime a situation is so desperate enough that it needs kind of a desperate response. And that was my desperate response. I stopped eating. That's all I did. I didn't have any plan. I didn't have any. There was no money. I didn't organize anything, and yet all of this stuff took place. So after traveling so much to other lands, and I did come back to help my constituents, and especially the ones in Appalachia. I'll never forget this lady who lived in a trailer with 3 children, and we brought some food to her. And when we brought the food to her, it had been a while since they had any decent food around. The children were running and jumping and thinking this was the greatest thing in the world. And I'm thinking, you know, kids shouldn't be happy about food. Should be happy about holidays and recess and having fun and playing games. But I never forgot how helping that one person, how much it meant to me, just doing that thing that's in front of us. And anybody can help one of the least of these. Anybody. Somebody asked Mother Teresa once, don't you think that what you do is a drop in the bucket? And she said, no, what I do is a drop in the ocean. She said, if I didn't do it, it would be one less drop. Her word to me was, do the things in front of you. You don't have to go to Calcutta. Many of you are very, very involved in many things, in good works. But, you know, if we all did the thing that's in front of us, can you imagine how this world would change? How it would be different? Thank you.
Questions, and we have some students who've come all the way up from Virginia that we're glad that you're here. We've got our local students, faculty, folks from town. That's a great group. How about one of the students from somewhere? Let's start with a student view. You like students, so let's put you right in the classroom. And then I'll step to the side and chime in if needed, but let you take it from here. Who'd like to go first?
Yes.
My name is Yosebet, and I was actually born the year of the famine. So I grew up, in the aftermath, which I feel like we still haven't recovered from. So it's really nice to hear from you and, get the first-hand perspective, really. Now, my question is, aid has always been available, and yet, we hear about how nothing has changed in Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa has not moved forward in the past couple of decades. So this brings about the question of how do you link direct aid to development work? And that would mean, strengthening the link between distribution and production and all of these other factors. So I would like your perspective on this. First of all, what is Congress doing, or what is the sentiment in Congress to bring about this change to long-term sustainability instead of, short-term Band-Aid-like solutions to global problems like hunger and poverty?
Well, first, what we try to do anymore, and we changed this, we started changing this about 20 years ago. Most of our aid that we give, whether it's emergency aid or development assistance, goes through nonprofits. And it goes through groups like the Catholic Relief Services, World Vision, CARE, Opportunity International that I help. They do microfinance, microcredit. And we decided a long time ago to not give our money to governments, because we didn't trust a lot of the governments to handle our money and handle our food and handle our development assistance very well. So we give it to people. We sometimes go with indigenous NGOs, PBOs in the country. And since we've done that, it's been much better. We try to be very careful how we put food into a country, because we don't want to upset the farmers there that are trying to get a decent price for their food. So that way, when we give it to nonprofits, then we watch them. We have accountability. We have accountants. Very little of our food and money gets stolen anymore. I'd say probably when there's a major famine like there was in Ethiopia, we might lose 3 or 4%, which is pretty good. There have been some instances where it's been, more embarrassing than that, but for the most part, if we lose less than 5%, we're doing pretty good. Now, don't for a second believe that emergency aid is a bad thing. It kept many Ethiopians alive. Matter of fact, Ethiopia probably has about 75 million people today. And Ethiopia, in its best day, if they have a great harvest, we still have to feed 5 million people there. Because we can't possibly, they can't grow enough. Because, as you know, their soil is not that good. It's very mountainous. And on their worst harvest, we'll feed somewhere between 5 and 15 million every year. So that's just to keep them alive. So emergency aid is not a bad thing. A lot of people say, well, why do we, we're going to make wards of these people. Well, the fact is we are keeping them alive. And it's not like, we're not talking about people in Appalachia here that are falling over dead. These people are falling over dead. They need it. They need water. They need immunization. They need food. So I'm all for that. But we put that money in food, we put it through nonprofits because they're good and we trust them. And they give a good accounting for the system. What we haven't done very well is we haven't done a very good job at doing development assistance, of helping people get on their feet. And we need to do a much better job of that, especially in clean water, microfinance, microcredit, sustainable agriculture. We used to invest a lot in agriculture in the 80s. And the amount of money and contributions going to agriculture since the middle 80s have actually gone down. Africa today is producing about as much food as they produced 30 years ago. And it's because the seeds, fertilizer, and their techniques are very archaic. Now, there are some exciting countries in Africa that are coming. Ghana is one of them. And Malawi. And Rwanda. Things are happening that are very, very good in a lot of different areas there. So Africa is not completely a waste. There are some good things to happen there, and we're going to stay with Africa. Now, I haven't been in the Congress it's been, I was an ambassador for 3.5 years, and I've been out. So it's been almost 8 years since I've been a member of Congress. And the other thing I want to tell you is that members of Congress really, and senators, are so busy, they don't know about this issue very well. It's not something that they think about. And there aren't a lot of people advocating for Ethiopia or for the Congo or for North Korea or for Darfur. Well, Darfur is maybe a little bit different because Darfur has been in the press a lot. As a citizen, and probably most of you are citizens, you need to take a more active role. You ought to go see your congressmen and senators. Try to see them once a year and put them on the spot. Now, not put them on the spot from the standpoint of trying to embarrass them, but put them on the spot and tell them that you're interested in this issue and you want them to become more interested. You want them to take a look at this stuff. We have a lot of members of Congress, both House and the Senate, that brag that they don't own a passport. They brag. You cannot stand for this. You shouldn't stand for this. You should demand that they go out and see what's going on in the world because they're spending a lot of your money. So if they don't go see where the money's going, how do they know? It took me a long time to answer your question. Yes?
You talked a bit about before if there's anything that Americans can do to change what they eat and how they eat in order to reduce world hunger and help to solve this issue just on a daily basis.
Well, I don't know if I can answer the second part of your question well enough, probably for you. But I can answer the first part of your question is that what I said before, Americans waste 110 million tons of food every year. It doesn't get picked. It rots in grocery stores. It gets thrown out. It spoils as it's moving to these various retail sites. Or even in our own house, we throw out lots of food. If we were to do gleaning, I mean, through our 50 states, we can imagine the type of food that we could pick up. I mean, we could cut hunger in half. There should be, in our country, nobody should ever go to bed hungry ever again. What's the closest city to you? Is it Trenton?
Trenton.
What if a bunch of people decided from Princeton to say, nobody's ever going to go to bed hungry again in Trenton? It's possible. You could have a hunger-free community. There are ways to do this. If you could do that, can you imagine the kind of businesses that would want to locate here? What that would do for education? People say, this is a group of people that take care of their own people. That could be exciting. But this 110 million tons, we can get a piece of this. And we can organize. You know that laundryman that I was talking about? He got so turned on about it with his 20 trucks that were picking up not only the linens and the towels every day, but what happened was he took that initiative to the National Laundry Association or whatever. They had a big convention. I think it was in Philadelphia or someplace, and told them about what he was doing. And as a result of one person taking that initiative, as a result of one person doing the thing in front of a whole bunch of other laundry people in the country, took that, like him, that were big laundries. So, just one idea can change things. Matter of fact, that's always been the way it is in history. It's never a great movement of people. It's one or two or three people that make a difference. It's always been that way.
You mentioned that aid is no longer, or there's pressure for aid not to go to governments for a number of reasons, which are very good, especially, I guess, in Africa. But I'm wondering to what degree there's an emphasis on having nonprofits, especially large international nonprofits, work with local groups, say like churches, because I was actually in Malawi this past summer, and this is anecdotal evidence, but I was in a small village where World Vision had come in about 15 years earlier and had examined this village, decided that they needed a dental clinic. So they built the dental clinic, but there was no dentist to place in the clinic.
Yeah.
So nothing was stolen. The building got built, but it really didn't do very much good.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen a lot of those projects. I've seen a lot of projects where we'll go in, sometimes our military will go into an old hospital and we'll completely revamp it, do the plumbing, bring in new machines on radiation, blah, blah, blah. We don't have anybody there that knows anything about radiation. They got to be taught. The manuals are in English. These people speak Arabic or whatever. So, yeah, we make a lot of mistakes, mainly because we go into a country, our heart is so good. Americans are amazing. They're very good people and decent people, especially when you touch them, but they forget to ask the people, what do you want? What do you need? You know, they don't need a dental clinic. And it would be nice to have a radiation machine or an x-ray machine, but they don't know how to operate it. They're not ready for it. What do you want? And that's the way we need to do it, you know, and ask them, the host country people, what's on your mind? What's your problem? You know, it'll probably come down to something simple, you We don't have clean water. Our kids aren't immunized. We can't feed our kids in school. You want to stop terrorism or put a real stop to parts of terrorism? Get people back in schools, get kids back in schools. I remember this farmer telling me in Pakistan, he told me that he sent his child to this school that teaches hate. I said, why do you do that? He said, I do that not because I like the school, I do it because it's free. They feed him. He boards there. He gets an education. You know how you compete against that? You go to the public schools and you furnish food, because when you furnish food to the schools, the kids will be back in school, because the parents, they need their kids to work in the fields. And they can't really feed them, but if you feed them, which is free, the kids will be back in school. That's one of the ways you compete. We want to stop terrorism, humanitarian aid, development assistance, about the best thing you can do overseas. Yes.
We have the Millennium Development Goals, which were done a while back with the United Nations, and America signed on, which was to have hunger in half by 2015, I think. Do you think that the U.S. is really committed to doing their fair share of that, or with the economic conditions today, is that just going to decrease?
The United States is not committed to it.
Just not committed? How can we get the people committed?
Well, I'll tell you, it's one of the things that I'm very much against, is that we go to these conferences.
Right.
And it could be with the G8, or it could be with the FAO, or it could be with the World Bank. We get all these top countries. We pledge we're going to end hunger by the year 2015, or cut it in half. We're not even close.
I know.
Not even close.
Because we're supposed to give a certain amount, we don't.
And everybody commits. Everybody signs a document. They go home, and they forget about it. And I think one of the problems is that they have no constituency. They don't vote. So, nobody's worried about them.
I mean the poor. Right. Yeah.
You were talking a lot about water, and I sort of was thinking in my own mind, do you branch out, let's say the food is being sent one place or another in the third world, and you can't do agriculture without water. Do you ever get into solar panels or other means of power where are they connected or disconnected, or do you have other groups come in to give the energy to dig the wells?
We have normally other groups that come in. They might specialize in digging wells. Mm-hmm. They might specialize in especially in a refugee camp of providing tablets to kill all the germs. They might specialize in sanitation. And we don't necessarily, we use a lot of our own nonprofits that do a very good job at it, but sometimes we'll use groups out of South Africa that are real good at it. And yeah, it's good stuff. A lot of times, like the question here, we don't ask the people, what do you want? What is it that you need here? Well, I'd like my children to go to school, and I'd like to have clean water. Okay, let's do it for them. We don't do a very good job of that. We're learning. We have some very, very good NGOs that do that. And we are not meeting our commitment. And I can tell you that since last year at this time, that you haven't began really to read about it, but there's been 30 nations that have been rioting now in the world because of lack of food, the cost of food, the cost of energy. And there's about 850 million people in the world today that are starving. And over the last year, we've had to add another 150 million to that list. And you're going to begin to see pictures of a lot of death, a lot of problems. And it's going to take some action from Americans to get on your congressmen and senators to do something about it. Now, President Obama, Hillary Clinton are starting to talk about this, but they need people behind them in the Congress that support this. Never underestimate the fact that you're a citizen and that you vote. Your vote is important. Don't ever think that it's not. Whenever I got a bunch of letters on a subject, whenever anybody ever confronted me on something that, I should know something about, but I didn't know a lot about, I'd ask my staff, what is this thing? Because I felt, I'm a representative of them. If I'm starting to get 100 to 500 letters on a subject, this is a serious issue. I want to know about this. And if your congressman or senator doesn't write you back, get rid of them. Vote them out. Get somebody in there that's going to do the job, but you have to confront them. A member of Congress thinks this: if you don't write me about an issue, there'll be something like 30,000 issues before this year is up in the Congress of the United States. 30,000 issues. If you don't write me about an issue that's bothering you, I feel then this is how members of Congress think. They think, well, then I can do what I want to do. I can vote the way I want to vote. But if you write me because you're concerned about this environmental issue or this water, whatever, then, I've got to consider your opinion because I'm going to have to go back and face you sooner or later. Never underestimate your power of one vote, of one letter. There was
Tony, you spoke movingly of your calling to this hunger and poverty issue, and we pride ourselves in this country of being a faith-based religious country. And as you mentioned, the Old and the New Testament are a dominant theme of helping the less fortunate. So it's always been a frustration to me that if we consider ourselves this religious country and our religious documents speak so directly to the issue, why is it we ought to be able to turn this country around on a dime? Thinking about the tipping point theory where a small number of people can create a catalyst to get large numbers of people to move in a certain direction. So why is it, do you think, this religious country of ours, this faith-based country of ours, can't turn around on a dime and follow its teachings and solve this problem?
That's a heck of a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I think a lot of us profess to be people of faith, but we don't necessarily follow it. Doesn't mean anything to us. We don't do anything about it. I think that's one answer. We profess to be a nation of great believers. We also believe that separation of church and state. I'm a great believer in that. There should be a separation. But at the same time, if we're really reading the scriptures about what God says about the 2,500 verses, and if this is the second most talked about theme, yeah, got to be leading and guiding, and there ought to be something happening. It's not. We go to these conferences and we make commitments to the world, and we say we're going to provide the money to cut hunger in half by the year 2015. We're barely keeping our head above water. I don't have a good answer. The other part of that answer is that poor don't have a lot of people supporting them. They don't have a lot of advocates, not only in Congress, but they don't have a lot of lobbyists in Congress. that are really working for them. So these people are lost. And if you don't bring the issue to members of Congress, they're not sitting around thinking about of Joe and Anna in Appalachia that are having to, stretch a can of Campbell's soup for a week. They're not thinking about that unless you can get to them. It takes leadership. It really does. It takes somebody like a president, like maybe even a Secretary of State. It takes somebody like, if they decide that this is the way it's going to be. George Bush decided that one of his things was going to be HIV/AIDS. And, he followed through with it. He did. Really, that's what he should be known for, what he did on HIV/AIDS in Africa. It's amazing. And he decided to take that leadership. I can't understand why a leader doesn't pop up and say, we're not going to have hunger in America anymore. We're going to solve this problem first, and we can do this. And then the second thing, we're going to take on the world. We can do this. We've never had anybody ever do that. So I don't have a good answer for you. Just, yes, sir.
30 years ago in Mexico, the average woman had 6.2 children. Today it's 2.2. That's not necessarily us. It's thousands of Mexican professionals, hospitals, with some help from outside, taking simple medical progress to the people who most need it. And they're happy to have that access. Our country has cut back on its interest in that subject as a way of stopping the growth of poverty and desperation, just enabling women to control what they haven't been able to control easily up to that point. So can you see this government? Obama has already tackled the so-called Mexican gag rule, which is part of this scene. But this is something that's an ancillary to hunger, poverty.
That's really a good point. When I was chairman of the Select Committee on Hunger, we did hearings on when we do basic education of women, when we teach women about reading and writing, the population of the country goes down, the gross national product goes up. That's what you said. When we invest in basic education and we teach mothers how to read and write, then they get so much smarter about how do you clean water, they get smarter about breastfeeding, about proper nutrition. They realize that they don't need as many people or as many children because their children are going to be healthier and they're going to live longer. And one of the reasons that so many have children in other countries is because that's their Social Security. And they hope that a good portion of their children, or some of them, is going to make it so that they will take care of their moms and dads later on. But women, you teach them about reading and writing. We did surveys on this. It was amazing. The gross national product of the country goes up, population goes down. Yes.
I was interested to hear about your story about the hunger strike and
It was a fast.
The hunger fast. Sorry, not a strike.
A strike
But the
is when you
idea-
want to do damage to yourself. I didn't want to do damage.
Sorry, the hunger fast and the idea that what your faith was telling you to do was different than perhaps what the U.S. Congress was doing at the time. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that sort of conflict of faith calling and your duty to the U.S. people, particularly in regards to other branches of government like the Foreign Service and the military, where people may feel a specific written duty to uphold U.S. policy, but at the same time realize that, say, as a Christian, they have a higher calling to God. So how to juggle those two?
Well, I'm a great believer in that you can bring faith into your workplace. And you can bring it into the Congress of the United States, you can bring it into the classroom, you can bring it into your business. And you will be faced with issues of principle. And there are times during the year that you will butt up right next to it. And you can shave it, you can compromise, or you can try to lick everybody and make everybody happy, which makes nobody happy. Or you can believe what, God is telling you to do and just do it. I remember I was a new believer in Congress, and there was this very difficult, we have about 4 or 5 very difficult votes every year. They're kind of make or break votes, that you're going to catch heck either way from your district, whichever way you vote. So you might as well do the right thing. Vote the way you want to vote. And so we had this issue, and it's the first time I ever prayed to God on how I should vote. And I knew the way I should vote. I knew the way my district wanted me to vote. And I didn't tell anybody about this. And what happened was, the way I knew I was supposed to vote politically, I didn't vote. I went the other way. I voted the other way. That pretty much went against my district. And I prayed about it, and I kept saying, God, I hope you know what you're doing here. Because I'm doing something very sensitive here. I've never stepped out in you. I've never actually prayed on a vote like this. And so after I made this vote, I went home, and the papers, front page of the newspaper, on just a vote. Hall votes, whatever. This way. I mean, they killed me. They blasted me. They ripped me apart. I had a town hall meeting, and there was about 200 or 300 people. Now, most of these people were my supporters. About 200 or 300 people there. I walked in. Everybody in the room stood up and booed me. Now, you can imagine my staff. They want to run, They're scared. Oh, this is the end. The fact is, the next election, nobody ran against me. You can vote. You can bring things in your workplace. You can do the things that you think are right. And people will respect you for it. I was talking to David on the way over here. People vote. There are some people that will vote on one issue, how you vote on this issue or that. There are one-issue people. But what people mostly vote on is the likability factor. Do they like you? They'll go into a voting booth and they'll say, I don't like Tony Hall on a couple of these issues, but I like him. I trust him. I mean, I'm hoping they say this. And this is, hoping they used to say this, but I think the fact is that when you make tough calls and it appears to go against people, and they knew that you made a tough call and you made it in a way in which you were honest about it, they can never hold it against you. And they give you lots of respect. And with that, you get tremendous freedom. And you get that when you make those kind of votes, principle votes. Now, I can't say that I voted principle every time. I didn't. But I can tell you a few times that I really tested it, and it works. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the United States issue of hunger, and it's really being called more recently food insecurity because we don't have people dropping over from hunger. But there are 3 ways, and I'm wondering if you would agree, that we can really stop that in this country. And one of them is the food stamp program needs to be increased a great deal, and we could all write to our congressmen and senators about that. The second way we can do it is to increase the WIC program, the Women, Infant, and Children program, because that's usually some of the most fragile people in our country. And if we also increase the food, school food, lunch, and breakfast programs. And there are many people now in our country who feel if we do those three things, we can eliminate food insecurity in the United States.
Those are good programs, and I support them, and they really, really do help. We can do more. There is legislation that I had written many years ago that Bread for the World is trying to push. It's called Hunger-Free Community, and it's a list of criteria of how a community can come together to try to solve their problems. This issue belongs with us. It's not just the government. It's you, and it's the churches, and it's the synagogues, and it's the individuals, and it's the schools. It's the military bases. It's individuals working together and having a plan to solve this problem. By itself, food stamps and the WIC program, they hit the majority of people, but it won't solve the problem. It won't end the problem. It will help, though. And actually, those programs were designed, they were designed really after the war because we had so many of our men going into World War II that were undernourished. Those are great programs.
I'll take one last question. I think that's right. Thank you.
I think you've worked with a group called Results.
I have.
What would you say about their way of encouraging citizen participation?
They're great. They're exciting, and they are full of life and passion. And I wish they were a bigger outfit. I mean, I wish they had more people because I always loved to meet with Results people because they always made you feel good because they're so full of joy and excitement and passion. And they're really, pound for pound, a great organization.
How about a round of applause?
I'll see you in
It's 9.
11.
9.
Pound for pound, you made us feel good. You have more of a hit than your small weight category might suggest. But also, there's a saying in some circles that clergy are supposed to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think you've done a nice job.
Well, that was good.
An honest broker crossing both sides of the aisle.
He's a good speaker.
I'm sure you've inspired some people, students, and community members alike too. So thank you again.